so far, we've listened to what Jung has to say about religion. I think it's high time to hear what religion has to say about Jung.
We can think whatever we want to think. We can have thoughts, lofty thoughts about God. We can have feelings, believing that these feelings somehow represent faith. Do not put your trust in feelings. They are things of psychology and of emotion, and they are generated within ourselves. That is not faith. Our feelings are not to be trusted.
We can see that in the biblical tradition, there has been Christ has been manifested basically as most of the archetypes. Basically, these are, if you know Robert Moore's book, he talks about how the main archetypes in Jung's work are the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. And in these icons that I put on the screen, Christ basically embodies all of these archetypes. One of the more interesting archetypes that I have really like, it's quite a unique thing. We can see that in Christ the lover, it's very interesting how it's called Christ the bridegroom. Basically, that in the church tradition, for one to participate into divinity, one kind of has to marry Christ to some extent, and this ties back to how marriage works in Orthodox tradition, where basically there is this surrendering of the will for the communion of the two people to become greater than they are by themselves, basically. So this is very interesting how Christ the bridegroom is represented. This is a quote from Saint Maximus in the 400 Texts on Love. A sure warrant for looking forward with hope to deification is precisely the fact that God has become man, for the Son of God became man so that we might become God. So there is this idea in Orthodox theology that God is basically the aim, that Jesus is the aim for which us humans need to strive towards, and that in the appearance of Jesus in flesh, basically the Logos is embodied. So as we've seen in the presentations of my colleagues, it's very important that these principles are embodied, because they manifest differently. They manifest as a concrete example. This is what Professor was talking about. I think it was the first keynote, and he talked about the need for embodiment. Okay. The psychological equivalent of what theology calls deification is the integration of personality, or becoming whole. It is a process by which a man can attain the fullness of personality, which consists in wholeness. So this is basically a Jungian approach to deification, but it's like I wrote here, it's 1300 years past Saint Maximus. And this is very interesting because it echoes a lot of the ideas of theosis in Orthodox tradition, but without mentioning Christ. So it's a bit of an overlap that is missing some points that in Orthodox theology are key. So now, if we're going to talk about Jung and Christianity, it's essential we pinpoint the metaphysics of the two and compare them. Since Christianity key scope is metaphysics, because in Christianity, you basically connect to something that is above you, and if this something that is above you is completely inaccessible to you, it is illogical to pray and to participate in church services. It's basically illogical. So you need to posit that there is metaphysics. So in this comparison, we need to find what exactly is Jung's metaphysics. If Jung makes all of these appeals to metaphysics and it's all smoke and mirrors, metaphors and aphorisms, then we might as well turn to Emil Cioran for psychological advice, because it renders the writing to quote-unquote vibes. Of course, this is a joke. We know that this is not the case, but here I have made a bit of a humorous image of what therapy with Cioran would look like. So yeah, man, it does suck. Matter of fact, did you ever think about ending it? No, this really never crossed my mind. I just want to get back. Well, think about it. This would be 400 euros.
Can you keep the slide a little bit?
Yeah. The teacher asked to keep the slide a bit open, so okay. Well, thankfully, Jung's system is not one of metaphors and aphorisms, but it's crucial that we know exactly why and how it differs from that. In this spirit, we need to understand how the archetypes that he mentions have basis in reality, how they're bridged and disseminated into humanity, and how the basis is constituted, and ultimately to uncover what presuppositions Jung subscribes to. So it wouldn't make sense for these ideas to be, only existing in a different reality, but for us to be unable to bridge it. So Jung also posits that we can bridge this a metaphysical gap that he doesn't necessarily recognize, but that he makes it apparent and clear that it exists. Jung is always, initially, he does a lot of negation of metaphysics. He says the following: I'm not concerned with metaphysics. I'm a psychologist, and my concern is empirical and scientific. I'm not interested in beliefs, but in what can be known, and that can only be established through experience. And then he says again, everything that I have written is based on empirical findings, on clinical observations, on dreams, and on psychological experiences. So he hammers again and again and again this point that he is somebody that does not stoop so low to the spiritual. He doesn't need to make these kinds of presuppositions that maybe not academic people do. He's a thorough academician, and he always thinks in these terms that are scientific. I have no metaphysical beliefs because metaphysics, as we know, is a speculative endeavor, while my concern is with the direct observation of the psyche. And next, we have a few interesting quotes. So we please need to keep all of this information in mind for the following quotes. 1 second. There are indications that the archetype also represents a kind of field that extends beyond the psyche, perhaps even beyond the brain, as in the case of ESP phenomena. This suggests that the archetypes may be linked to a more fundamental stratum of reality that transcends the individual. This is, in my opinion, clear metaphysics, but we will go to the next one. Philemon and other figures of my fantasies brought home to me the crucial insight that there are things in the psyche which I do not produce, but which produce themselves and have their own life. Once again, I think it's a clear call of metaphysics that Jung makes, albeit he mentioned that he doesn't make these kinds of claims, but it's clear that he implies something that is beyond and transcends the human condition, that he also can access. Again, if it wasn't clear enough, the collective unconscious is not a figment of the imagination, but a living psychic reality comparable to the physical world, but existing in a different dimension. And now it's basically impossible to not make the claim that Jung is appealing to metaphysics. No matter how you splice it, how you put it and imagine it, unless you're stretching the idea of metaphysics and you're basically changing the idea of metaphysics to appeal to Jung, you cannot make the claim that it doesn't appeal to Jung. You need to change it to something different. It's clear. It is absolutely undeniable that something is covering the screen again, and I can't see the word. I need to move this around. That Jung has been intentionally dodging some aspects of metaphysics as to assure that he doesn't lose credibility. This is made evident in the fact that he was unwilling to publish most of his work that do heavy on spiritual traditions, such as the Red Book and the Red Book. I said books, but because it's basically a collection of books of essays, and the Black Books published in 2009 and 2020 respectively. So these are publicated way more time after his death, because he was. It's clear that he was afraid of losing these academic credibility. Man is a gateway to which you pass from the outer world of the gods, demons, and souls into the inner world, he writes into the Red Book. And the inner world is as infinite as the outer. Very interesting, echoes a lot these ideas of as above, so below, in both in Christianity as in Hermeticism. Let's go further. So now it's up to us to do a bit of a detective work and try to understand what kind of metaphysics Jung has exactly. So let's go through the motions. Is Jung a Kantian? Yes and no. He adopts the idea that God is a mental structure, but he rejects the notion that this structure is static or merely a filter, instead presenting it as a living, evolving aspect of human psychological reality. But is he a Hegelian? Yes and no. He views consciousness as dynamic, self-unfolding process that moves through conflict and synthesis towards wholeness, similar to Hegelian dialectics. We will talk soon about the story of Job, where basically he says that God basically self-actualizes through humanity, which in Orthodox theology is bizarre, is a complete heresy, and it doesn't make sense. Only from a Hegelian standpoint it makes sense. But Jung departs from Hegel by emphasizing the autonomy of the unconscious as an active and often irrational force, not just a state in a logical progression, but a living aspect of the psyche that resists rational control. So the closest match, which he also recognizes, but he recognizes Kant as well. He wasn't that big of a fan of Hegel. He was more of a fan of Goethe and Schelling. He thought that Hegel was too rational and logic, that he didn't make enough of an appeal to inner experience. So in the essays on the archetypes of the collective unconscious, published in Collective Works, Volume 9, Part 1, he states plainly, archetype is an explanatory paraphrase of a Platonic eidos. And for this, we need to... 1 second. Look, this is basically a summary of his influences. So from Kant, he took the insight that there are innate organizing principles and limits to egoic knowledge. So you can only go so far in your own understanding of things. From Plato and Neoplatonism, he adopted the notion of eternal forms. So in Platonism, there are these aeons, these eternal forms that echo a lot the ideas of the archetypes and the ideas of so above, so below principle. And from Gnosticism, he drew a dramatic myth of light and dark, fullness and lack, that maps on the unconscious and conscious. And the similitudes to Gnosticism go even further. Through German idealism and Romanticism, Jung inherited the conviction that mind or spirit underlies reality, that by nature and psyche mirror each other, and that truth emerges by reconciling opposites in a higher synthesis. So this is Hegelian dialectics that he doesn't necessarily approach. He changes them into a more emotional approach. In Neoplatonic system, matter is the lowest level of reality, the farthest from the one, associated with change, imperfection, and potentiality. If you look at the graph, basically a lot of these things that we're feeling and from which we are interacting with, they are emanations from the one. And this is why they are not perfect. And it's our place to basically understand these emanations and work our roles and our identifications in between the manifestations from the one. This is not a deliberate act of descent, but a natural outflow of one's infinite fullness, similar to light radiating from the sun. This is how matter is viewed in the Neoplatonic sense. This journey requires overcoming the distractions of the material world, aligning the soul with the nous, and transcending the intellect to experience the one directly. This maps a lot to Orthodox theology, but Jung does not necessarily view it entirely like this. He basically views the nous, the nous in Orthodox theology is how we can perceive these spiritual dimensions, and it's like a detector of signals, The importance of theology is that in most of Jung's works is by his own accord a reinterpretation analysis of religious texts from his own lens, which he developed over the course of his academic work. Being aware of the original meaning of the text that Jung reinterprets is crucial, because in the scriptures that Jung analyzes, there is a lot of context and tradition that cannot be ignored. Otherwise, it's very likely that you're intentionally isolating key details in between which you can build anything you see fit according to your own cultural biases. So you can do this basically you can do this with literature as well. Like if you do not look at a historically inspired novel, you can extract the story and map it to your own self. But this does not mean necessarily that you are approaching the text from the from its original scope and from the original tradition in which it's been written and passed. Because historically we have written text because it needs remembering, it needs reactualization. This is why people wrote the texts initially. This is why literature came about, so that the information is retained and passed and on to further generations. So this entails that the people that wrote the text had found some utility for the text, and it's been passed for initially a very specific reason. Why Orthodox theology? Because of the available, verifiable historical proof, it's the closest lens to interpret the original scriptures in their original context. Maybe you can make this argument if you're a Catholic, as well if you're subscribed to the Catholic tradition. I couldn't interpret and make this presentation from a Protestant lens, because Protestants have this tendency to adapt a lot of the biblical quotes to the certain to their certain situation, and they do not have such a good understanding of the church fathers, of the authors of the Filocalia, they have a lot of great philosophers, of course, but they're a bit divorced from the original interpretations. And this is also something that they acknowledge. This is something that they seem as good in their philosophy. So one of the clearest things that Jung was talking about from the Bible was the story of Job, the definitive differences between Jung and Christianity, the interpretation of God. So for who doesn't know the story of Job, it's the story begins with a heavenly dialogue between God and Satan, in which Satan challenges Job's piety, suggesting that Job, I hope it's spelled Job in Romanian, it's Jov. It's faithful only because of his prosperity. To test this, God permits Satan to strip Job of his wealth, family, and health, leading Job into profound physical and spiritual suffering. Job's friends visit him, each offering theological explanations of his suffering. But in the development of the story, God ultimately restores his fortunes, blessing him with even greater prosperity than before. But it's a very important question. Why is this seen as cruel? Because you can read the text and see that the way that God is testing Job it's extremely tough. It's almost a sadistic, if you look at it from a historical psychological perspective. Now, if you would be to do something like that to another human yourself, if it would be a human on human thing, you would be accused of a lot of different things. So this is the slide, one of the slides with the more text. Jung's interpretation of Job takes a radically different approach, and it views the text as psychological and mythological document. And this is where the bizarre interpretation of Jung comes in. Jung interprets this as a moment of self-reflection from God, for God, because Job basically, he says, "Okay, God, send me further into this. I understand. I don't want to be sent further. I mistakenly said that, but I understand that you're wise, and whatever trials you will take upon me, I will. Okay, you're wise. I will be your faithful servant continually." While metaphorically the interpretation Jung is offering, he still seems to imply a slight metaphysical edge to it that by any means doesn't have any sense in any Christian denomination besides Gnosticism. So in any Christian tradition where God needs to self-actualize, it implies that God is not perfect. And this can only be found in Gnosticism, where the world is governed by this imperfect demiurge. And they have a lot of very complex mythological aspects to it. This demiurge is emanating from, it's a creation of Sophia, which is emanating from the Godhead, which is unspeakable. So it's levels divorced to God's perfection, so the creation of an imperfect God in Gnosticism. So it's only in this context that what Jung is saying can make metaphysical sense. And if not, it's just a metaphor, but it doesn't it doesn't map normally to why you would use the word God in that context. It makes sense as a metaphor, but it doesn't make sense as a system, because he clearly makes metaphysical claims. So he's either subscribed to Gnosticism or has this tendency to overly metaphoricize different ideas. Right. So, is God an archetype? We've already talked about archetypes. I don't need to go to this again. It's interesting how it's called that archetypes are innate, universal, and transpersonal. All of these terms should, again, make you wonder about Jung's metaphysics. The moment you call something universal and transpersonal, you do kind of involve a metaphysical aspect to it, especially if they're so fundamental and important. So it would seem like archetypes are the bridge between humanity and reality. Interesting idea. Kant is unavoidable here. If you talk about bridges, it seems quite clear that these archetypes may be an emanation of the real, or in Gnosticism from the Godhead. In Lacanian terms, in Lacanian terms, there's this like real, and in Kantian too, this real world that we cannot access. We only see the phenomena or the noumena. It renders metaphysics unspeakable, irrelevant, and leaves us spiraling and trying to arrange the pieces of our subconscious by ourselves, in ourselves. This is the problem in this Jungian perspective. The psyche is the only immediate reality we can experience. It is the only place where the real and the unreal converge. So the psyche is basically the bridge. It implies that the psyche is connected to a metaphysical reality. In psychological types, Jung explicitly invokes Kant's terms, stating the archetypes would be, to borrow from Kant, the noumena of the image which intuition perceives and in perceiving creates. So again, a bit of a Hegelian thing. It perceives and in perceiving it creates. It's, again, very strange from a Christian perspective. It's once again going to how humanity redeems God, but humanity is made in the image of God. It's a bit confusing. We will continue to talk about this. This is the archetypes, as I have described them, are extremely similar to how they're viewed in the Orthodox tradition. Angels and demons are intelligible beings existing in a spiritual realm beyond space and time, and capable of affecting human thought, emotion, and even physical circumstances to subtle energies. Extremely similar to archetypes so far. Both traditions reject a purely materialistic worldview, insisting that reality is multi-layered with visible and invisible dimensions interacting to spiritual forces. In Filocalia, the nous, intellect, is constantly influenced by the spiritual forces. Extremely similar, again, which can inspire or tempt the soul, much like Jung's archetypes, which exert subtle influence from the depths of the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious, if you would view it from a Christian perspective, is just the spiritual world. We will talk about that soon. The intellect is simple and without shape, and so the thoughts which arise from it are also immaterial and without shape. In the same way, both holy angels and evil demons, being noetic and incorporeal, can influence it in pressing images upon the intellect that correspond to their own nature. So this is in one of the first volumes of the Filocalia, which is a collection of writings from the Church Fathers. I believe that this quote is around the 300 years after Christ, so way before Jung. There are extremely similar ideas in Orthodox theology. Jung also maintains a deliberate ambiguity regarding the origins, speaking of them as emergent realities. But when the moment you mention emergent realities, you imply that they emerge from something. And this is the problem. Jung never experiences from what they emerge, but he presupposes that we can interact with them. And this is paradoxical. Religious experience and symbols become expressions of inner psychic dynamics rather than the disclosure of transcendent truths. But if they're not transcendent truths, what kind of criteria do we have to make the distinctions, if it's good or bad, if it's how can we make these distinctions if they're so interior and divorced from transcendent truths? Jung's psychology can be termed as an example of intraphysic theomorphism, where divine attributes traditionally attributed to God are internalized and psychologized. Instead of humans being created in God's image and called to relational communion with Him, Jung's psychology suggests that humans create or project a divine image as part of this striving towards wholeness. But Jung never accounts exactly why this happens. This internalization aligns closely with the historical Gnostic traditions. The intellect cannot see God unless it has become godlike and has made God its home through the practice of the virtue. So this is a quote from Saint Diadocos of Potiki, which is extremely different. It says that indeed humanity can perceive these transcendent truths, but for this it has to go through some kind of purification by your normal stance and state. You cannot interact with these things and have discernment as if which is good and which is wrong. In Orthodoxy, it's crucial that before you even think about interacting or identifying with any sort of archetype, you have the correct discernment. If not, you can fall into what's called prelest, basically deceivements of advancement, false promises of advancement. This can only be achieved following dogma in Orthodox Christianity that has been first-hand experienced by people of high trust in the religious community. These are very specific rules and safety nets for a spiritual prelest in Orthodoxy, and there's a high accent on community, even in some of the first serious groups of monks. So in Jungian terms, how can you know if what you're experiencing isn't just psychosis or schizophrenia symptoms? Jung's lack of delimitation can be argued to put some predisposed people at a very high risk of having the false belief that something greater is interacting with them, because Jung presupposes, giving his position as a very esteemed writer, he thinks that all people have these solid egos, but unfortunately it's not necessarily the case. Some people do not have such clear egos to themselves and may fall into this prelest, into these deceptions. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, Jung says, but by integration of the contraries, as opposed to biblically, and if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away, for it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body going into hell. So this is a metaphorical explanation of the difference between acknowledging and integrating the shadow and aligning with a superior principle to, again, somehow integrating the shadow, but you're not necessarily integrating it. And you're not dissipating it. It's just that you're tuning in to a different, more important energy. He also talks about the unus mundus, which is an underlying unified reality from which both psyche and matter emerge not as separate substances but as complementary aspects of a deeper singular essence. So this is a call to panphysicism. This is again very interesting to me, that people can call that Jung doesn't subscribe to metaphysics. This is a clear metaphysical cosmology. The unus mundus is an expression of the primordial oneness underlying the duality of matter and spirit, the ultimate unity from which all things arrive. So extremely similar to Gnosticism to some extent, more akin to like Hindu traditions such as Advaita Vedanta. In functional terms, Jung's approach also exhibits a form of pantheisms, but again, metaphysical realities seem to exist. Synchronicity also works in this single deeper reality. A lot we see now in New Age spirituality, where they say that you can basically change your frequency and get in tune with the success frequency. You change your frequency and get in tune with that. It seems to kind of play into this pantheistic view that Jung has, this New Age spirituality. He also acknowledged Gnosticism, admired Gnosticism, as well as alchemy. The agnostics were fundamentally psychologists, the first to ever trouble themselves about the psyche and such. They recognized it as potential for good and evil and sought to understand the processes within it. The Gnostics emphasized the spark of divine light within man, which they believed to be true inner self imprisoned by the material world. But instead, this is the key difference between Orthodox theology and Jung. Jung purposed that you need to go into yourself, and Orthodox theology says no. If you go into yourself as you are now, you will fall into deception because you have no dogma, you have no criteria of discerning if you yourself right now have the correct inclinations. Because since truth in Orthodox Christianity is objective, you need to first of all check if you are in close relationship to that truth, and you cannot check by yourself. This is the thing. You need a priest for you to tell that, and you need to understand that you need to fall into a tradition of people that have themselves outlined and firsthand experienced these emotions. Gnosis, again, this is in Gnosticism, is a direct experiential knowledge of the divine, which Jung interprets as the awareness of the self, the central archetype of the psyche, representing the totality of the conscious and unconscious mind. It's a very interesting idea, but it's extremely similar to Zen Buddhism. But even Zen Buddhism has very clear safety nets. It has extremely close to Orthodox Christianity. It has traditions. It has you get all of these ideas, all of these texts, all of this literature from masters that are above you. In Zen tradition, you get these. They tell you what to do. They oversee your actions so as you do not fall into psychosis. There is a big risk in Zen philosophy, since you're so concerned about having a non-distinctive mind, that you can fall into psychosis. If you look at it in Lacanian terms, if you stop making distinctions, you can easily fall into a psychosis. So again, very important that you have people and communities to cross-check these internal emotions that you have. I have mentioned a lot of these points before, and it's interesting that Jung creates a mythology. What makes his Gnostic interpretations right? He makes it clear that it's an assumption. He says we don't know things. But from my understanding and from the things that I have been exposed to, from my observations of the patients, the system that I have outlined is closest to Gnosticism, as we've talked about. Even Jung's critics accused him of reducing religion to psychology. They said, okay, you take all of these ideas from religions, from Buddhism, from Orthodoxy, from Christianity, not necessarily Orthodoxy. I don't believe Jung was, because of geographical limitations, he was exposed to Orthodoxy. But how come you're taking all of these elements, but you're not meeting them on their own metaphysical ground? How come you never try to meet the metaphysical ground from which you borrow all of these informations? When the center of your system is based on your subjective vision without external verification, supposes a very strong ego that in the face of such intimidating principles stands unbroken. However, if the ego is not calibrated correctly, which Jung hardly explains how you should check for if the ego is calibrated correctly and cover for that, there could be some very serious psychiatric consequences. So if tomorrow I think that I'm the king of the world because the archetype of the king has been embodied into me, there isn't a very clear thing in Jungian psychology that says, okay, maybe you should check into a psychiatric hospital because this is not working. Of course, this is a bit reductionistic, and I'm sure that there are very clear understandings in clear Jungian psychology, as in the system that is studied by people that are Jungians therapists. But I'm saying that the system is extremely vague for the layman, when he stumbles across this, at least, and it needs a lot of mental gymnastics to completely understand and manifest it correctly without it putting you at a severe risk if you're predisposed to that. So now we need to understand what was the original interpretation. So Jung again says he reinterprets religious language. Let's talk about how religious language has been intentionally and originally organized. So again, he says that he subscribes to the as above, so below thing, that if humans are so imperfect and they're always changing and actualizing, it also entails that the higher reality is very akin to this. So this is kind of making in my opinion, a bit of a parallel even to Nick Land or to Deleuze, and where they say that reality is inherently schizophrenic, and it's also it's always into a process of rearranging itself. And I don't know, it's an interesting thing to keep in mind. It also posits that the system is ontologically closed. So if it's always within yourself, and if the symbols are detached from a real metaphysical references, you're incapable of true transformation, precisely because genuine transformation requires participation into something genuinely transcendent in Orthodox theology, which is the uncreated grace and the energies of God. You cannot attain salvation alone, for you're all members of one another. This is a quote from Saint Macarius of Egypt. So this is the problem. Of course, again, as I have mentioned, there are a lot of cross-checkings. There are a lot of things that Jungians subscribe to in this matter, but the system is ontologically closed, and it starts from the first thing. It says that it's ontologically closed because it has these Kantian differences built into it that Kant recognizes and cites by Kant's name. In Orthodox theology, one of the most esteemed writers of Orthodox theology, Seraphim, wrote, "The whole system of Jung is one of the most perfect examples of spiritual deception in modern psychology. It is a system that acknowledges the reality of the spiritual world, but without Christ, without humility, without repentance, and without struggle against sin." So Jung's collective unconscious is nothing other than the spiritual world, which it's very clear from the beginning of the presentations, in which I have outlined that Jung has this metaphysical sense of reality. He says clearly that there is a transcendent over the reality that goes over the person, that goes over the individual. So this in Orthodoxy is nothing more than the spiritual world. It's been extremely written about. And because you do not have this cross-checking and this dogma attached to it, you can open yourself to influence of precisely those dark, irrational, and demonic forces. And this is again something that Jungians themselves recognize, that if you fall too deep into the archetype rabbit hole, you can stumble across these archetypal demons to some extent, these archetypal energies that consume you, and that it's not necessarily a foreign idea to either spiritual traditions, is what I want to mean. So Jung's entire system, as Father Seraphim Rose recognizes very sharply, is a kind of psychological Gnosticism, or psychologized Gnosticism, exalting the inner self at the expense of true spiritual struggle and union with God, in which the human sends the God image and it actualizes in the demiurge to a kind of course, this Jung would not approve of these things. Both Jungianism and Orthodoxy focus on direct experience, key thing in both traditions, but they vary hugely in their approach of manifested symbols. Again, a quote that highlights the importance of experience. A man who speaks of God without experience is like a blind man discussing color. Definitely something that Jung would agree with. Each system demands a Kierkegaardian leap of faith, since they imply some validity of the intuition, either overtly or covertly. Each implies that symbolism can lead to redemption, albeit different types of redemptions, as opposed to a, say, Lacanian framework that downplays the concept of redemption severely, if not somewhat invalidates it. So if I'm taking this, if I'm not mentioning that I need to take a leap of faith to follow Jung, why not follow Lacan? Why isn't Lacan good? And Lacan doesn't think that if we follow these symbolic realities, we reach something greater. We just try to fill the gap, to basically use jouissance in a way that we feel this ontological gap that's built into our being, according to Lacanian psychology. So there is a kind of existential trust in the reality of something unseen, and that they point to something greater. Because if Jung's system didn't point to something greater, and if it was extremely only self-referential, it would all just be a tautology to some extent. Not to some extent, it would literally be a tautology. And here we are heading into the Orthodox presentation as first part we covered Jung, now we will cover a bit of Orthodoxy. So Jung really makes calls to morality and is vocal about good and evil being a necessity polarity within blurry lines, but this is very far from Christian theology. He does make every now and then calls to morality. He says that even he says that morality is given and somehow objective, interestingly enough, and then he says that it's blurry, extremely gnostic. Okay, these are a few quotes which relate to this idea. So faith, as Jung describes it, is the greatest and most important problems of life. Because the greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. This outgrowing proved further investigation to require a new level of consciousness. Some higher or lower. I need to move this Zoom thing. Man, I hate Zoom. Some higher or wider interest appeared on the horizon and thought this is broadening of outlook. This insoluble problem lost its urgency. So you need to basically find a new horizon to outgrow your problems, even in Jungian psychology. But when confronted with a new and stronger, so that you're confronted with a new and stronger life tendency, but you cannot do that without faith, because faith implies that you subscribe to a system that takes you above you and into a greater thing. And such in both systems, sacrifice is inevitable. We stand in need of reorientation, a metanoia, a metanie in Romanian. A true ethic must be based on the psychic reality of the individual. So initially you would think that this quote is from Orthodox theology. It's not. It's from Jung. I forgot to cite the book, but I can and will cite it if needed. It's extremely interesting how he uses the word metanoia, which implies repentance, as in Orthodox terms. But I think that he changes the context of it. And god damn, this isn't complete. I think I have put the text too low. Again, in Christianity, I can paraphrase this. The system has already been tried and tested. You know, it's that Christ already has fulfilled all of these different problems that Jung has mentioned. The path has already been tried and tested. So in Christianity, the way is clear. It's a path of discipline, tradition, and community, where either family or asceticism is the environment. A lot of the church fathers write about how, you know, it's in between asceticism and family. It's very different from a modern life. There is an infinite amount of mystery in the essences, so it doesn't at all discount from the mystery of God. The greater cause, you know, which is God. But for Christians, there is no mystery in the steps that humanity must partake in order to participate into the divine. But here's the interesting thing. The individual retains his individuality, as we see in all of the saints and their stories. It is the individuality and the personal manifestation that is sacrificed, sanctified and raised, and even celebrated as an incredibly diverse spectrum that is brought onto and eventually into Christ, into theosis, you know. So this is why we have iconography and we have all of these different stories of saints. This is nothing. This is a celebration of individual lives. You know, you have some of them who were warriors, some of them who were cooks, some of them who were doctors. So it's not like in Buddhism where you die and you melt into the energy. No, here the individual is sanctified. It's raised onto his greatest spectrum, which is Jesus in theosis. The great decision of human life have the great decisions of human life have as rule far more to do with instincts and other mysterious unconscious factors than with conscious will and well-meaning reasonableness. So a quote from Jung, which again makes a call and an appeal to faith and to the thing that you need to trust your instinct, basically. Christ is both a symbolic reality and an ontological reality. This the second part Jung was trying to dodge. It has to maintain symbolic reality because it is only in this way that God can be received to humans, since the Logos is language and symbols. And here's the thing. There are archetypes in Orthodoxy that have been written and clear that there are Orthodox archetypes, but of course archetypes in between commas. For the Logos of God is the universal seed, which was in part implanted in the whole human race, and those who live reasonably are Christians, even though they have been thought as atheists, like Greeks, Socrates, Heraclitus, and men like them. There is one river of truth, but many streams pour into it, providing the good, the beautiful, and the true. All these partial truths come from the one Logos. And here is the most interesting thing. Orthodox Christianity doesn't necessarily deny manifestations of other religions, even paganism. It puts them into the question that they have manifested from God, with a capital G, or lesser deities that have been denied in the church tradition. It puts them into question their source. Christianity is the complete picture because Christ fulfills the prophecy in Orthodox theology. And initially, all of these cosmologized and entities and things may seem entirely lunacy, you know, in post Renaissance and not post Renaissance, post Enlightenment. But the thesis of everything that I have said so far is that if you subscribe truly to the Jungian way of seeing things, you should have absolutely no problem positing that Orthodox Christianity is true, because you already tick so many boxes, and it doesn't necessarily make sense as to why you would not take some things into your beliefs, because they already fit so closely, and you need to have like at least a very clear discourse of why you choose not to engage into those practices. Again, even Jung says that morality is not imposed from the outside. We have it ourselves as a law of life. If this is not a metaphysical claim, and if this is not a reinterpretation of the Logos, I'm a bit confused as to why what it could be, you know. He even says that good and evil are principles which, though beyond human control, still form beyond human control. This is very, again, a call to metaphysics. Still form the warp and weft of human life. We are not the only architects of these principles, but their carriers and promoters. This is a closer, which I will paraphrase since it's extremely long. I find this very interesting, that the only thing sillier for basically these people like Peterson, who tend to overly symbolize these ideas, is to claim that, for example, the Greeks didn't really believe in the gods, but they practice religions, you know, like ironically, like meta-ironically, like we go to Comic-Con or to fairs. I don't think, if I may say, that the Greeks went to the temples as we do to Comic-Con. I think there are different things. If they believe in a spiritual nature, these Petersonian figures that the text that Luke criticizes is either psychological or hormonal, so it has to change, you know, to change the thing. So modern paganism, this is not related to paganisms. Again, Christians believe in pagan gods. I have already covered this. Very interesting thing that theologically makes a lot of sense, that it was basically polytheism was explained from Christianity, and that there are fallen angels basically that have lost their power after Christ has appeared to the New Testament. So again, if you subscribe to polytheism or paganism, you should have no problems into taking these into account. I think that this is mostly it. Yes, if you have any questions, I will take them. Thank you for your attention. Is there anyone from online first before we go to people in the room?
I have a question.
Yes.
What do you mean when you say that Jung does not wholly explains how you check out and cover the way you can be possessed by archetypes? I think you were trying to say.
Can you say the question again?
Yeah, so in your presentation, you sometimes say that Jung doesn't cover or explains how you can protect yourself from, I know, an archetypal possession. So the limit between, I don't know, schizophrenia and normality, or
Yes, no.
Being, I didn't really understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah,
I'm a little bit confused.
I corrected myself after it. I said that it's not necessarily apparent only to people that are very deep into studying the Jungian system. Like I said that if you are a civilian or a layman and you go into these texts, you may be prone to having a very different understanding of it. I understand that there are some. I actually don't know if he mentions clearly these safety nets. Can you explain them to me if he does do this?
He does in a way, but I have another question for you. So you make this parallel between Christianity and the Holy Fathers and their text and the dogma. And I want to ask you, how does Christianity protect from experience?
Well, it's in Orthodox Christianity, it's extremely simple. So
Okay.
basically, you have a lot of stories about monks in Athos. There is this very interesting story about this monk who thought that he was given, some kind of download, so say, from God, and he went to a cave basically. So you need to first understand that monks and all of these church things, they're centered around community. So if by any chance you do things that are against the dogma, which Zen Buddhism also has dogma, and a lot of other religions have a dogma, you have this very clear checklist and this very clear understanding of if what you're doing is from God or not. For example, in the story of the monk who went to the cave, it said that he was doing these kinds of miracles and he was predicting the future, and people were coming to them, and some of the monks from the mountain came to him and says, "Brother, what are you doing?" And they found out that he was extremely good at the Old Testament, but he completely denied the New Testament, and this is how they realized that the wonder working that he does is not how it's called, it was from demons basically. So they went and prayed, and when he he cited a lot from the New Testament, but he forgot how to read. This was the thing, and this is what they realized, that this is coming from Prelest, and eventually he came back and he did the wonders in like the community. But there are many such cases for people that because you basically when you go to confessions and when you participate in church life, you're told,
Okay, so you're told by someone and by the community if your inner experience corresponds to what could be called something real or something from God, or if not.
Yes, and preferably you have a priest that understands church traditions and that knows the text correctly, because
and in Jungian psychology you have an analyst who does the same thing for you in a way.
Yes, yes.
So
this is if you are a client. But,
okay, and if you're an Orthodox person who go to the church and you don't have a community, you can, I guess, follow into these things as well, right?
And
so you're
it said that it's if you're an Orthodox Christian that doesn't go to communion, you're not really an Orthodox Christian. So.
Okay, so there is this condition. You can have the experience by yourself.
It's outlined that it's very risky to read about these things without having this community and practice tied to it. Yes.
Yeah. So what I was trying to get at is that Jung does that too. So in analytical psychology, there is like this big warning sign that some of these things must be, approached in a very careful manner. So I just didn't understand very clearly what you're trying to say about these things, about analytical psychology not being very cautious about some things, because it's kind of a straw man, picking up some things that can sound in a very, maybe extreme way, and trying to not put them in a context. of
Yes,
living
no,
by some rules as well when you practice or where you enter. This, I don't know, we can call it spiritual domain or spiritual practice with dreams and myths and so on.
yes, but if you look at how Jung was basically
Okay.
navigating this experience that he had to the writing of the Red Book and the Black Book, you could, by medical standards of today, say that he was suffering from psychosis, from a self-induced psychosis. He was very adamant about interacting with people from his dreams and participating in what I believe he deemed it live, not live, but imagination,
Active imagination.
Yes, but
Mhm.
from that he extracts metaphysical things. He metaphysicalizes Philemon to some extent. He turns it into but this is the Jungian metaphysics
Yeah,
that
I know, but when you go to the Red Book or to the Black Books, it's very weird to quote from them. They're being like this very personal and inner experience of Jung that he didn't really write for an explanatory purpose. So people live by all sorts of narratives. So you can't just
yes.
like justify his metaphysical claims by citing some very personal, out of context works that he did. It's like I think it's you're being a little bit harsh on this thing. And about psychosis, you have to tell me what you understand, what it means to be psychotic.
Yeah.
By what I don't know, by what criteria. I wouldn't say Jung was psychotic, but he clearly had access to a sort of very, very deep experience. We are psychotic when we dream, in a way, but it's a very controlled and normal type of interaction in our psyche. So
Yeah, I understand, but unfortunately, a lot of these things they basically breached containment from the larger tradition. And in my opinion, if you subscribe to these ideas, you should be it should have been made clearer at least to take them into such context.
okay, I understand what you're saying,
because
but
if you look at a lot of ideas from the Red Book and the Black Book, they've breached the containment of the Jungian thing, and they went through all of this especially with panphysicism, with the operas, The Secret and the Law of Manifestation. So they became kind of pop psychology things where people don't even understand what exactly they are.
yeah, but this is what Christians do as well, with like angel tarot cards or kinds of spiritual practice that are informed by Christianity. But
Yeah,
the way that
definitely.
Jungian theory was used after does not really say anything fundamental about his work.
Yeah, definitely. Like if I made the presentation just Christianity, not Orthodox Christianity, it would have been on the same part. But again, like my main problem with the essence of the Jungian thing is that, again, I find it extremely similar to Gnosticism. Like I cannot understand, and I have read Jung to some extent, of course, not like passages. I don't claim to be a Jung expert by any means, but you can make the case, and there are people that make the case, not to appeal to authority or anything, that his system is very akin to Gnosticism. If you're projecting an image, an imago Dei, or how he calls it, you're projecting into a self-manifesting God that needs to manifest itself through the. It's very hard not to make it sound like Gnosticism. This is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, and being like Gnosticism, your point is that he takes a lot of things from Christianity and misinterprets them, so they fit his model, and leaving behind some very important aspects.
Yes,
Or
of course. Like if from the Orthodox point of view, you leave exactly like the most important aspect, which is Christ. He basically archetypalizes Christ, but in Orthodox Christianity, Christ also has an ontological being and has a tradition associated with it. So the case that I'm trying to make is that it's a bit of an incomplete system.
Okay. I see you have a question in chat.
We have one more question from Andrei Sârbu.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions.
Okay.
First of all, you mentioned something about a heresy on the base of Jung, and you just mentioned also now that what he said is not according to a tradition. Can you elaborate a bit on that? What do you mean by heresy and not aligned to a tradition?
Well, I'm basically a heresy, of course. I'm not a pope. I will not burn Jung's texts or something because calling heresy. But Gnosticism, from an Orthodox theological point of view, is a heresy. And as for tradition, a lot of the symbols that he uses, when he talks about Christ, when he talks about the story of Job, when he talks about the Old Testament God, a lot of these things, they're not talked and adopted from the tradition in which they've been written. This is what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Well, he points to the psychological facts. So analytical psychology points to the human experience. He's not pointing to the metaphysics. Though he mentions those, he does assert that psychological facts are the only way we can experience metaphysics or whatever
Yes,
is on the other side.
Have you been from the beginning of the presentation?
Yeah.
Yes, I gave this quote word for word. But this is not what I'm trying to argue. I'm not trying to argue against this thing. That the psyche that we have is not necessarily the immediate reality. I'm just saying it's not the only reality within the Orthodox Christian framework. I'm just
Okay.
I understand, and I understand, but I think that this is true, but it's not necessarily the full picture,
And what's the difference between what you mentioned, the red books and the black books, as being maybe psychotic, which I do not agree, but what's the difference between that experience and the experience of a monk isolated in a cave communicating with God?
Well, it's not that big of a difference, actually. You can definitely make the case that a lot of these monks and a lot of these spiritual people, not only from Christianity but from all religions, have especially for Gnosticism, that it's only schizophrenia. Lacan says this a lot, that it's just schizophrenic ramblings and stuff like this. But in the Orthodox point of view, basically, it's that the monks are operating within a very established tradition, which at least Jung, at the moment in which he was experimenting with these with his active imagination things, there wasn't such a Jungian tradition, since he was Jung. So he was a frontliner, if you want to view it like this, so in the Orthodox, how do I close this? Okay. In the Orthodox point of view, he was falling to prelest of lesser deities, which is always also, like in Orthodox theology, this is akin to psychosis. And you can also, like, if you look at a lot of church fathers, they
What do you mean in Orthodox psychology akin to psychosis? Can you erase
theology, I mean, yeah.
So
Basically,
what
a
do you
lot
mean? Orthodox theology and psychosis? What does it mean?
we will need to close it. I'm told, but
All right.
I will answer very fast. you basically need to pray against visions and stuff like this. It's also not necessarily a good sign in modern
Okay.
Orthodox theology. Or it's something that has to be looked at with extreme how it's called discernment. You know? Like you need to have an extremely high discernment to view those things as not being psychotic. So even in church traditions, it's not necessarily great to have, unless you're extremely developed into the tradition, this sort of things, you know. Okay, so we need
Okay.
to close it. Thank you a lot.